just like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Rubrik, Pure Storage, and Zscaler, and we'll be hearing about the latter right now. So the great thing about this presentation is we're moving into a case study. We talk about zero trust before, we talk about it during, and in this case, we're going to be talking about the implications of it after. So I think we'll just move, because of time purposes, we'll move right into the case study uh, because it's a fantastic opportunity to get someone to talk about the ransomware experience and not have to couch it under secrecy or something that's right here and happening. So in addition to having Tamara Baker, a good friend and CTO of Zscaler, I'd like to introduce Nate Couture, who is the AVP and CISO at UVM Medical Center in Vermont, and have him just sort of discuss the case study as it is, how this all started, how you reacted to it, and then we'll get into more details as we move on. So thank you, Nate.
Yeah, we don't have to do unnamed hospital in northern New England, right? That we all know who we're talking about, right? Um, yeah, so I think most of us probably not so fondly remember the year 2020. For me, it was rather unkind. Not only were we dealing with a pandemic, which for all of our hospitals meant we were figuring out new ways to do care that we had no idea how to do. But also our workforce all left the office. And if your hospital was anything like mine, the concept that someone would work for a hospital and not be physically in an office wasn't something that had ever crossed anyone's mind. And so all of our security controls at the time were based on sitting in an office. And now we had people who were out, they were everywhere. There were not enough VPN licenses for everyone to be on at one time, so people would hop on and hop off as they needed, which meant they hopped from behind your security controls to outside of your security controls. In that scenario, we had an employee who had access to personal email while they were off VPN. That's where they got hit, because they got in through personal email and it got their machine infected. But then as soon as they hopped back on VPN, that malware reached home, said, hey, we're on a real network now. This is no longer a home network. Come get us. It was less than an hour later that the threat actor had moved through, collected domain admin credentials, gotten onto a system that had access to the back end of our virtual infrastructure, and just launched encryption against every virtual hard drive all at once. It was 15 minutes later, everything was gone. 1,300 servers disappeared, right? Over 600 applications and services offline. That also included all forms of communication. Your phone system was voice over IP, gone. Email, gone. And we would have to start working on recovery from there. It wouldn't be until 3 weeks later that we were coming back online with what Josh just talked about, of kind of that really minimum viable hospital. It was 3 months later before we were done restoring applications. And it was many months beyond that before we were done actually backloading all of the data that we needed to get backloaded into patient charts and billing and everything that goes with it.
Catching my breath. Tamara, I know, just moving into Act Two of this, just looking at the anatomy of an attack like this and zero trust strategies. So, can you describe some of the high level anatomy of ransomware attacks and top attack vendors in healthcare? I mean, how do you, based on, I know you have an intimate knowledge of what happened at UVM as well. What reactions to this from an executive point of view?
Yeah, I think we could talk about attack vectors and it first, and then we'll talk about recovery and what was used later. But Carol, I think if you could throw up, I think we have two slides real quick here. If you could share that for us, please. All right, thank you. So I like to talk about this in two simple ways, just because it's easy to relate this, especially if you're trying to relate this to other people in your organization that may not be IT focused, and you're trying to have conversations about, patient care is or cyber care is patient care. How do I get funding, et cetera. And when you're having these conversations, it's tough for people to visualize, well, what is happening? How are we getting hit? So I like to relate this like a bank robbery, right? So it's a good story to take back to your other non-IT team members if you want as well. But how does a bank robbery occur, right? First things first is those robbers have to target you. They have to find all the branches. They have to find, exactly where everybody's at. And, if I want to go after First National Bank, where is all the branches that, who's going to have the most amount of money, et cetera. Once they do their scoping and find you, the next step is they're going to find the least secure branch and break into that branch, right? So step two is just to find the vulnerability and break into that branch. And from there, they search around the branch. They stick them up, and as they're getting in there, they find the manager, they find the keys, and then they go move laterally across the branch and find the cash safe, the big giant safe to get opened. And once they get that opened, of course, they're going to haul away as much cash as possible before anybody catches them, or the police get called. So that's a very, very easy story to tell a CFO even or a board member. How does that translate to us in IT? If we can click the next slide, Carol. It looks very similar. Number one, they find your attack surface. A very, very, very common attack vector. We heard from Ryan, of course, was phishing, but when they do phishing, or with what happened, to many other health systems, what are they doing with those credentials? They have to be able to log into something publicly, right? They have to find your attack surface. It's all the things that are exposed to the internet, your firewalls, your VPNs, your Citrixes, your VDI sessions that are exposed online, all your applications that are exposed online and have a publicly exposed IP. That's step one. Like they just got to find you to be able to do something. Once they've found you and they've used, phishing or whatever it may be, and some people will say, well, I have MFA, so phishing is less of an issue, but there's many ways to bypass MFA as well. MFA is a good thing to have, don't get me wrong, but you can still get your credentials phished and then have that poor user MFA bombed as one example, and then boom, that attacker gets on your network and they've compromised you because they were able to log into something that's publicly exposed. Once they've compromised you, and these were, I think, on the last session with Josh, even, you saw some of these same steps again, a little bit more in depth, but an easy to tell story here is once they've compromised you, they're able to continue compromising different parts of your network, and they have to move laterally across your network and do the privilege escalation, find where your how you value assets are. And as Nate mentioned, this all happens very, very quickly. But once they're in your environment, they're able to move freely and compromise more things and then encrypt the good stuff, as well as step four is they're stealing your data. Just like a bank robber stealing the cash, they have to take your data. Oftentimes, as we saw in the last couple briefings, even it's not just a ransomware now. It's also we're being forced to pay so they don't release your data to not just encrypt your data or decrypt your data. So very, very high level. It's in line with some of the other stuff, but this is kind of an easy story to tell if you're trying to struggle with how do I get the rest of my organization on board with ensuring we have what we need to be able to stop these attacks. You can tell these stories in a way that makes a little bit more sense here.
That was great. So Nate, after you said "holy," whatever the expletive it was, after that you got breached to this extent, what was your immediate response? I mean, what do you do next? I mean, how much of this was already baked in, and how much of it was sort of learning on the go, on the fly?
Yeah, it was a little combination thereof. And what I'll say is it's the early part that was more baked in, and then the what comes next that was not.
Mhm.
So immediately we triggered our regular incident response process that, everyone's got that kind of first 2 days baked out probably pretty well. We had an incident response retainer in place. We brought that firm in. We began investigations. We did our regular containment activities. We started taking down internet connections and third-party connections. We had decent logging in place. We were actually pretty quickly able with our partner to find the source of the attack and go through it and find the indicators of compromise through our log management system. But then we started to hit the problems, right? At the time, we didn't have an EDR in place, but we rolled one out with the incident response firm. And when we did so, we found that what we thought was originally a small contained attack, after they'd done the encryption, they'd gone on to infect over 5,000 additional machines.
Hmm.
They didn't encrypt them. They just infected them, hoping that, if we just restored applications came back online, we'll come back and get you again. But then also what we found is we didn't have control or visibility anymore to our own tools and systems, right? So our log management system was in the cloud, but all of the systems that are needed to collect those logs and send them there were gone. So we had no logging, no visibility of what was actively happening in the environment at the time. We had firewalls sitting there. We couldn't manage them. The management systems were gone. So we were really struggling trying to figure out how we could deal with this. We needed to start being able to manage connectivity to get through the recovery. We needed to see what was going on. At the time, we were a fairly new customer with Zscaler. We had done a really, really basic, we were replacing web proxies, right? Like we were trying to get rid of a blue coat here and a Sophos there, and we'd done some really basic stuff. My Zscaler rep called me up, said, I heard what happened. We just turned on every license. Give us a call if you want to use it. So I immediately called him back. What we ended up doing is we let all of our traffic go to Zscaler, and we used the layer 7 firewall there. And we started to be able to do application-based traffic control and things there and get at least immediate visibility. So now we could even find where we had missed deploying the EDR agent because we were seeing command and control traffic. So we started to get some control back that way. The other problem we were now in is, it's kind of become cliche at this point. We talk about how, we're trusted networks inside and the untrusted networks outside. And we all talk about it, and it sounds good when we have these zero trust conversations, but now I was actually living it in real time. We really were expecting that internal network was trusted, and there was a lot of things we did on it, assuming that. I now had 5,000 devices I did not trust on my trusted network. And we quickly realized there are some things clinically we can't do without technology. We didn't have time to figure out how we were going to contain or deal with these 5,000 devices for things like cancer care. You can't mix a chemo cocktail by eye. So we started building segmentation on the fly, reactively, and creating an environment where we stood up just radiation oncology systems to get back cancer care going again. We realized, kind of like Josh talked about earlier, the EMR's not actually the most important thing. You can chart on paper. In fact, we realized you don't want to turn the EMR back on. We had the EMR ready to turn on before other things, but if the things it needs to integrate with aren't ready, it's actually dangerous because you are not going to have the integrations you want. The clinician's going to put an order in expecting something to happen. It's not going to happen. So you can't turn it back on. But access to that data is really critical. And knowing that patient's history, because while you can chart what they're doing today on paper, I need to know what happened to them when they were in the hospital when they came last week. So we ended up standing up an isolated environment on the fly to bring back just a read-only copy of our EMR and get access for our clinicians to that. So those are some of the places where we had to leverage some of these zero trust concepts in how we got back to working as a hospital.
Fascinating. I was on a validation where they were talking about the younger doctors having to relearn how to write a handwritten prescription on top of this, which was a major challenge. So Tamara, I mean, we talk about zero trust. We hear it all the time. I always talk about post zero trust, what happens afterward. But in this situation, this is a matter of reestablishing zero trust after the fact, right? It's not, I mean, we did it before, we have it in the middle. How do you reestablish it and say, it didn't seem to work this time, but we want to do something different?
Yeah, I mean, so what I loved about Nate's story is that when most people think about zero trust, they're thinking about it in a preventative way, right? Hey, I need a zero trust program to be able to prevent compromise, which of course zero trust helps with, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But Nate was unique in the sense that he leveraged zero trust to recover because he didn't have it already in place, but he was able to use us and zero trust and principles in general for that recovery. Going from the bad network to allowing access to the things that were critical when we knew they were safe and clean, having the visibility to do so, et cetera. I think that was a great combination of usage for us, and I'm very thankful that we were able to be there in that sense because most people don't think of us in a recovery aspect. But yeah, if we pull up Carol, I think we have one more slide here on this topic. And people's minds when they think about zero trust is they only think about users only having least privileged access to something, right? There's a lot more to zero trust than that people don't realize. And if we look at those four stages we talked about earlier in the higher level, how does zero trust help with these four stages, Frank? Step one, again, if we're finding your attack surface to be able to try and compromise you as a bad actor, what can I do with zero trust to minimize that? And that's first and foremost, hide it all. Hide those things that are on the internet so that the bad actors can't even see them or use them. So one of the top attack vectors today, aside from phishing, is attacking those network security appliances that are online directly, right? Because of the plethora of 0 days that are critical and hitting all these systems all year long. I'm sure everybody on this call or in this webinar right now has gone through tons of another XYZ vulnerability on my internet exposed security appliance. It's supposed to be a security appliance, and yet it's getting exposed to these things. So removing all that stuff from the internet is a big step one that Zero Trust helps. Being in the cloud, being a SaaS provider platform type of deal makes it so that they're not able to even attack that platform. You actually have that visibility full time and hide everything else from the internet, from the bad actors. From the compromise piece of it, where does zero trust come into play? Again, that's making sure the malwares can't reach the endpoints. That makes sure that all the traffic is being inspected and decrypted because 90%, 80 to 90% of all these bad actors, they're launching their attacks in encrypted channels. So if you're not decrypting that stuff, you're going to get hit by it eventually. It's going to make it all the way down. So this is where zero trust helps with a lot of the preventative pieces of it. Oftentimes, there's a ton of phishing attempts that get blocked, meaning by the time it reaches our cloud to block it, that means it's already passed through all your other phishing protections, your email protections, etc., right? It passes through all these other things before it finally reaches us, and we're stopping it last mile. The third piece, moving laterally, this is the big one that was talked about even in the last session with Josh and with Nate. That lateral movement happens quickly, and this is why when somebody does something bad in your environment, a clinician, a nurse, or whomever opens something, clicks something, uses their personal email, whatever it may be, if they don't have these other protections in place, all of a sudden that bad actor has carte blanche access to everything else, right? That lateral movement is a big proponent of this, where zero trust helps. Even if something somehow, some way gets compromised, you're still preventing it from that bad actor from being able to get to see anything else because they can't see everything at this point. And then the last piece is stealing your data. Believe it or not, this is a big component of zero trust too, ensuring that data loss protection is in place across many different forms of data protection. So these are the four ways that we relate from that bank robbery to the high level conversation and to where zero trust kind of falls into place across all of these pieces.
Excellent. Excellent, Nate. It's almost crazy to ask if there were lessons learned in this. It's not a matter of whether there were lessons learned, but how many different
Yeah, no
areas,
lessons learned.
how many
Nate didn't learn
different,
anything from
yeah,
this.
how many different areas were there lessons learned? I worked on somebody who actually shut down their system for 48 hours. And one of the lessons they learned is communicating with people that didn't really even have technical roles that had to use this equipment for just more ritual or more mundane tasks. I mean, how do you take these lessons learned, turn it into an educational program or a rehabilitation program of sorts to start fresh?
Yeah, I mean, we could go way more than our half-hour time talking all the different angles of lessons learned here.
We'll do
Um,
part two.
but I'll hit some high ones, right? I think one of the key ones, we talk a lot about having incident response plans. I really want to challenge people to think about having an incident response and recovery plan, right? What I would challenge probably any of the InfoSec folks on the call right now, once you go crack open your incident response plan, do you have a box somewhere at the end of it that's something along the lines of, and then IT will recover the systems, right? Mine had something like that, where I thought my job was going to be done, when I got to that point. Well, I was on that point on day two. I would continue to work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next month. My job was not done there. You're going to need information security guidance throughout and how you're handling this recovery. Um, the other thing I would suggest is as much as you want to prepare, be prepared to be unprepared. These things can break a lot of different ways as they're going. There is no way you're going to have the perfect plan for everything. Adaptability in your tool set, and even more important, adaptability in your people and your teams is going to be what ultimately gets you through it, right? And then, I think the other thing I would say is take some of these zero trust concepts and think about, we applied them post haste, but there's ways that these can help proactively as well. We had happened to have segmented off our lab for the opposite reason. I don't trust lab devices. They're all pretty bad and scary. So I had segmented them from the rest of my environment. By result of that, our lab wasn't impacted. The lab was impacted operationally because they couldn't communicate with anyone else, just like everyone else. They couldn't upload their results and things like that. But the lab itself was functioning, which was pretty important when you are the primary lab for an entire state in the middle of a pandemic. So these are the kind of things where, you can't boil the ocean, but try and think about those crown jewels and how you can bring those off and put some trust boundaries around them.
Fantastic. Tamara, can you talk a little bit about zero trust architecture and
Yeah,
enhancing security with that?
yeah. I mean, so I want to put a little bit of spin on this based off of some of the earlier sessions that were talked about. And I saw some of the Q&A questions coming in. I'm not sure how many were answered live on this. But one of the questions I remember somebody asking when I was sitting here listening to everything was they were asking about vulnerability management and how important it was for, for mitigating vulnerabilities, et cetera. And people don't think of, again, when if you can kind of tell some of the themes that I'm hitting on with zero trust is it's a little different than people expect, right? So Nate is using it for recovery. Zero trust incorporates many different elements other than just user access to, to least privileged access. But believe it or not, the vulnerability management piece comes into play in the sense that if I have a critical vulnerability that exists and I'm trying to prioritize all my vulnerabilities, and et cetera, but if that device, if that system, if that application, if that security device, whatever it may be, isn't exposed to the internet, how critical is that vulnerability, right? Where's the risk? I think Ryan from FBI was the one that had harped on multiple times, like it's, yeah, we do mitigation, but risk is always there, and it's risk management. And when we think about zero trust, it really reduces a lot of the pain when you're trying to do that risk management because now these vulnerabilities aren't exposed, meaning if there's no attack vector to it, their risk is greatly reduced. So I'm managing risk a lot better. So when we think about that architecture, when you're thinking about how you deploy zero trust, Nate was a great example of he was under pressure and had to deploy it quickly. But believe it or not, that's one of the common myths of it's a very hard thing to do. It's very difficult. It's very costly. But he got it done in no time. We've got another health system out west with 50,000 users, fairly large size system that deployed zero trust in this application in this piece of it because it's a SaaS product and I'm not managing and maintaining the hardware, et cetera, was able to do that in 3 weeks with an intern. An intern is the one that deployed it. Now that intern quickly became an engineer on the team after doing that job in 3 weeks. But that these are some of the myths when we talk about architecture and how hard and et cetera. It's not as difficult as you may think to be able to do
Mhm.
this, especially with it being something that's cloud provided.
Great, solid advice. Ironically, I had a question come in that alluded to one of Nate's comments. Do you find that there are serious issues trying to decrypt traffic from healthcare devices?
Okay, yeah, this is a great question. So, if you're talking about like medical devices, we typically wouldn't have to decrypt medical devices because we're just making sure that those medical devices are communicating to the vendor websites it needs to go to and then blocking anything else. So it can't communicate to command and control as an example. I don't need to decrypt a medical device traffic in that sense
Mhm.
because I'm actually monitoring where it's communicating to and from and just stopping it from doing anything bad that way. So everything else, though. So when you're talking about decrypting your traffic, you're not decrypting a medical device thing and reading, somebody's patient information. It's more along the lines of making sure those medical devices aren't talking to the wrong things outside.
All right. Nate, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we do, right? It's the difference between unpredictable traffic where I have to basically allow everything and then go find the bad within it and knock it out. And then a more predictable device where I just don't allow you to talk to anything other than what I predict that you should be talking to, right?
Yeah. Believe it or not, the medical devices are the easy button when it comes to that, right? They have a very simple kind of communication that we
Interesting.
put in that box.
One other question: how vulnerable? Sorry about that. Are cloud systems like Salesforce or Google Workplace compared to LAN desktops?
I think what is vulnerable in that space is they're easy, very easy to hyperconnect with other applications. We've seen it all the time. Something comes up and it's like, yeah, click here to, link your Google to, whatever it may be. And now you have you have this one protected system that you think is everything is good, but there's 10, 15 third-party things all coming into it that you are blind to. Having that visibility on all these things that are connected helps reduce that risk of all these other cloud applications, by the way, and then removing that connectivity because your users just click approve, yes, yes, let's get this interconnected. That's something else that we are able to help with, by the way. So I don't know who asked that question, but believe it or not, that's another part of something that we can help with, showing you how these systems are interconnected and all with all these external third parties, and then killing all those third party connectivities.
Uh, just in the spirit of time, I think we have one more slide, Carol, that we would want Tamara to talk through here.
Yeah. Okay, so as it's pulling up, one thing I do want to mention is Nate is fantastic because he knows as well. Zero trust is not a single vendor solution. There is no magic silver bullet. Even Zscaler, I'm not going to say like you buy us, you get zero trust. Like it's there. If any one vendor tells you buy us, you get zero trust, that should raise some red flags. It does require multiple vendors to make this happen. And I don't know if I can advertise your products, Nate, and your other vendor partners, but some of the strategic partners that are in use, with Nate and many others are CrowdStrike, Imprivata, Rubrik, right? And Rubrik was just on as well. The point of this is that when you think about zero trust in the architecture, it's there to help you prevent, it's there to help you also recover from an incident. So there is a great webinar coming up for those of you that may be interested. If you want to see what an ecosystem looks like and how an ecosystem comes together to help you with the resilience as well and recovery, not just the prevention, this is something that we're going to talk about. So it's all four of us together that are going to be having this conversation. Please, you can use that QR code now, or I'm pretty sure it's been mentioned before. All these slides will also be shared if you want to go ahead and see us four in action too. And Nate has been a great partner to all four of us, so we love you, Nate. Thank you. We're here to help. We're glad that we can provide you that help to make sure that you don't show up in the news again.
Yep. Yeah, and like Tamer said, we worked with two of those four prior, and at this point we now work with all four of those. And it really is an ecosystem approach. And I think that's what I encourage folks to think about. And as you talk to your partners, make sure your partners are talking to your other partners, right? None of us can do this alone. We certainly can't do this alone on the hospital side of the equation. We are just faced with way too much. We need folks like Tamer and others who are working with us to help us through this.
This is great, gentlemen. Nothing beats a real life story. So appreciate it. Thank you for your supportive chime. And over to Lisa Gallagher.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, team. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.